Good morning
Hello.
or good afternoon. How are you, sir?
Good early afternoon. I'm doing well, and yourself?
I am doing very well.
I appreciate you coming out for us for
Absolutely.
chilling.
Happy to do this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And as we begin, it's already recording as OC, so we're kind of in the interview. I might as well start things off here. If you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Rawoka? It seems you're a native from there, correct?
I am a
Am I
native.
pronounced?
We
Is it
woke up.
Wawoka?
Yeah, we
Wewoka?
woke up.
Okay. I'm an
Yes.
Oklahoman, so it would be embarrassing. I'm sorry. Go on.
No, you're good. Which actually means barking water, by the way, in the Seminole language.
Barking.
Just a little tidbit there for you.
So,
Um, well, I was born in Holdenville, Oklahoma, which is 7 miles that way. My mom worked for a doctor in Holdenville. And 6 months after I was born, she and my father moved here to Wewoka, where my father was from. And I have been here ever since. Um, Wewoka was an oil boom community. It is the capital of the Seminole Nation and has been since 1866. It's a very historic community, but it was an oil boom community. So when I was growing up here in the 70s, it was a very prosperous community. There was still a lot of oil money here. It was a very cultured community. They were very cognizant of their history here, and they made a lot out of that. They wanted people to appreciate it. It was very much, I've heard people describe it as Mayberry. Um, Everybody knew everybody, everybody looked after everyone, everybody um, was just, they were friends, everybody got along. It's the kind of community where you could, send your kid out at the street at night, tell them to come home at sunset and they'd be fine. Uh, my family was in the jewelry business. My grandfather and my great uncle started a jewelry store here in 1935 during the boom. Uh, so my family has always been involved in Wewoka. My father was mayor. My mother's been president of the Chamber of Commerce, you name it. So I grew up in a very public environment. I was very involved in the community of Wewoka, serving the community of Wewoka from a very young age. So I've always had a very close connection to Wewoka and small communities. Uh, I graduated from Wewoka in 1968. Um, Went to Oklahoma State University, mainly because my cousin was going there, and that sounded like a good idea. Of course, my cousin dropped out just before my freshman year, but I went to OSU anyway. I liked Stillwater. It was a bigger town, but still kind of a small town. Made a lot of good friends there. I studied physiology. I'd always had an interest in the sciences. My mother was in the medical field, of course, and I always thought, well, let's try medicine. I think I'd like to be a doctor, which just thrills everybody's parents. Oh, my son's going to be a doctor. So I graduated in 4 years with a degree in physiology, and a lot of my friends didn't. It was pretty tough, but I graduated, and then I thought, that's not really what I want to do. I'm not. That's no more school, thanks. I'm good. Good, thanks. Um, so someone that I grew up with, a classmate of mine, their mother worked at a bank here in Wewoka. And she said, hey, until you decide what you want to do, come home. We'll give you a good job and you can just decide what you want to do. So that's what I did. And I was happy to come home. I loved Wewoka. It had started changing in the 80s because the oil boom went bust. And of course, we kind of put all of our eggs in one basket. So when oil went under, the whole economy went under. And Wewoka really started changing in the early 80s. But it was still my home. And, I wanted to do what I could because it had done a lot for me. I got a wonderful education living in Wewoka. So I came back and I got involved in the banking business. And I thought, well, I'll do this for a year or two till I figure out what I want to do with my life when I grow up. And I ended up spending 10 years in the banking business. I worked with people here in Wewoka that had been in the banking business for 50 and 60 years. These are people whose families founded Wewoka. These are people who cared about community and what you could do for your community. And that was expected of us. It wasn't just that you worked at the bank, you made your money and you went home. You were expected to be involved in the community and support your town. And I believed in that firmly. And actually, it was in the banking business that I became affiliated with the museum for which I work now. I was asked to be on their board of directors in 1992, and I thought, well, I don't know anything about the museum. I've been there, but sure, I'll give it a shot. And the longer I was associated with the museum and the more I learned about this community that I'd been living in for all these years, I thought, I kind of like this. This is pretty cool. And I became, as I was in the banking business, a little disenfranchised with it. It ceased to be about community and it began to be more and more about money, and of course, a lot of regulation, federal regulation, and that just made it awful on everybody. So I thought, the museum needs a little help. Financially, they had some problems. They were a very small museum. We woke as a town of only about 3,200 people. So, by the time the oil business had gone and by the time NAFTA came along and moved out a lot of our clothing factories, things were getting pretty rough. Unless you were in a bank, which they were making, they were making money. But I thought, I can do this. I have a background in finance. I can run a business. I've been running a business my whole life. Just to circle back a bit, after my parents divorced, my mom kept the jewelry business until 1990, the year I graduated from college, and then we sold it. We realized that WeWoka couldn't support that kind of a business, which is why I didn't go back in the jewelry business. So anyway, I thought, I like this history business. I like this nonprofit stuff, so we'll give it a go. So in February of 2000, I transitioned out of the banking business. I'd been in the banking business almost 10 years. And I went into the museum business, about which I knew nothing. I knew what a balance sheet was. I knew what an income statement was. I knew how to run a business. And it occurred to me that they weren't running it like a business. It had become a hobby for a bunch of older people, a little clique. And I thought, we've got to do something to help save this museum. The town's having trouble, but we can't let anything happen to the museum. What else is going to bring people from Japan and Germany and Australia and China to WeWoka America? Well, the museum does. And we couldn't lose that. So I thought, well, I never intended to be in the banking business. That didn't work out. So let's try the museum business. What have I got to lose? And it's 21 years later, and here I am, still here.
And
loving every minute of it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, to specify, that is the Seminole Nation Museum, right?
Yes,
correct?
Seminole Nation Museum, yes.
Yeah. And it seems as though you have many accolades from that. I think just this year it says that you were appointed to the Oklahoma Museum Association, like at the presidency, correct?
Well, I have been a board member for OMA for probably 8 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. And yes, in January, I started a 2-year term as president, which if you think about it, being from a very small museum in a town of 3,000 people, that's an accomplishment. And I'm very proud of that.
Oh, I would as well. Could you take us through the chronology of your time at the Seminole Museum up until the present? Like, you give me your initial, hesitancy as if you did the banking and now you're in the museum. But after you got over that initial hump, what was it like? What was the, what were some of the more memorable exhibits that you really felt were special compared to others? And how has the museum grown since you've been a part of it?
Well, yes, first of all, when I got there, I didn't know. I was green. Oh, I didn't know anything. But here's a little story. About the third day I was there, the lady who was our curator, now understand this woman was in her 80s. She helped start the museum back in the 60s. Every day of her life had been devoted to this, but she was a part-time curator. She was retired. She popped in now and then. Anyway, I was standing in one of the galleries and we were talking and somebody brought her the telephone. It was the director of the Five Civilized Tribes Museum in Muskogee. They were updating an exhibit and had asked, I learned listening, that they would like to borrow some artifacts of ours to include in a new exhibit they were doing about the Seminoles. And Mrs. Norman was her name. She said, I'll never forget this. She said, I'm sorry, we don't loan out our objects, but thank you for calling, and then hit the button and ended the call. That was it. That's what she said to the director of the Five Tribes Museum. And I thought, oh, we've got a problem here. This is going to take some work. And when the board hired me, they had expectations that I was going to come in and do things. Her expectations were that I would come in and wait for her to tell me what to do. So we had a little, and I got it. This was her baby. This had been her life, you know, for 30 years or more. I thought, I got it. But one day she told me that I would touch those exhibits over her dead body. And I thought, okay, now we really do have a problem. And I don't mean this to be hateful, but a few months later, she obliged me and she passed away. And I shouldn't laugh. She's a wonderful person. But a lot of the first many months, it was about breaking down barriers and making relationships and trying to get them to realize that you have to change or you die. You have to progress. You've got to take the Barbie dolls out of the cases, because they thought that that's what kids were interested in when they came to museums, was looking at little Barbie dolls dressed in clothes in the cases. So the first probably 2 years I was there, it was just building some relationships with the other board members and kind of breaking a few barriers. We had to prove to some of the older board members who had been there for 30 or 40 years that there is a different way of doing things, and it can be successful too. So that was my first couple of years. And that's when I started bringing in some outside exhibits. We never believed in changing anything. You know, there was a mannequin in the building wearing an outfit in 2000 that it was wearing in November of 1974 when they opened, you know. So I started bringing in some exhibits through Exhibits USA. One of them that was very popular was on World War II posters. And that allowed me to engage a lot of the veterans in the area, because we did a fantastic exhibit. I mean, we did it upright. We had flags from World War II. We had the posters in the exhibits. We had some veterans telling stories. I mean, we really did it upright. And I think that was the first time we started making some inroads a lot with the older generation, because they're like, oh, well, you all have never done anything like this before. And I need to mention, just so everybody will know, our museum opened in 1974, but the idea for it went back to the 60s, to the early 60s. The Seminole Tribal Council passed a resolution in December of 1963 authorizing the creation of a museum. But they were only about 5 years away from forming their modern constitution, back in the late 50s. So the Seminoles didn't have a lot of economic development resources. They were more interested in getting the tribe up and running as a political entity, providing social services to the members. So they knew that creating a museum, while important, wasn't and couldn't be on their priority list. So the chairman, John Brown, worked with the community of Wewoka, the city of Wewoka, to come together to build a museum. And in 1966, which was the centennial of the Seminoles coming and making Wewoka its capital, they had a week-long celebration, a big pageant, all kinds of events. The governor was here. It was a huge deal. But all the money from that event went towards establishing the museum. So we opened as a partnership amongst the city, its people, and the tribe in November of '74. So I just wanted to just give you a little background on that.
Oh, I was going to ask, so it's really nice that you just took the initiative there.
I do it. I explain that a lot. So anyway, and today we are as what we were in 74. We're a 501c3. We are not owned nor are we funded by the tribe, although we do partner together on projects. In fact, the gentleman that is the assistant chief now worked for the museum for 20 years. He's quite the historian and flute player. So anyway, our board represents the diversity of the community. Wewoka was settled as a freedman settlement, a black settlement. In 1849, the Seminoles came here in 1866, and then of course with statehood and then the oil boom in the 20s, then the Anglo population increased. We have always been a very ethnically and racially diverse community, which I think is by far to our benefit. And our board reflects that. We have people from all walks of life, all races, all ethnicities on our board, which I think is one of the things that has propelled us the last decade and a half, is bringing in input from different parts of the community and outside the community as well. So I think that's helped strengthen us. That's taken me completely off of what I was talking about a minute ago. I don't even remember where I was.
It's okay. We were talking about your history with the Seminole Museum, and
okay.
we got a little farther back than we did forward,
yeah,
but that's
I
okay.
just gotten through the first couple of years. I'm going to tell you, you can edit this part out.
Oh,
I have my Sonic.
You're in Oklahoma, and this is a necessity for an interview.
I saw on Facebook this morning this thing that said, people in Oklahoma express their love for one another by buying someone a Sonic. So
that's very true.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we brought in this World War II poster exhibit. We put a lot into supporting it and everything that went with it, and we got a fantastic reaction from it. Everybody on the board was thrilled. Everybody in the community was thrilled. So I knew then that there was an opportunity for us to start doing some new things, creating new programming, reaching new people, and building more support. As a 501c3, it is terribly important to us to have connections in the community, to build relationships for financial support, volunteer support, all of that. As I had mentioned, the economics of the museum was not good. So we had to start pulling on all the levers. We had to start engaging new volunteers, new exhibits, new donors, new collections. People had stopped giving collections to the museum. You know, they were kind of ambivalent to it. So we had a lot of ground to cover. That and the fact that the building, museum building, was falling apart from neglect. And the next few years of my time at the museum, in addition to improving gift shop collections and engaging some of the local craftspeople, we also had to work on the building. Since I mentioned the gift shop, when I got there, they were selling maybe $8,000 to $10,000 a year of stuff out of the gift shop, t-shirts, hats, stuff like that. We started building relationships with a lot of the craftsmen. We started carrying more craft supplies. We started identifying local people that were making quality crafts, beadwork, Seminole patchwork, all kinds of different things. And the more we bought from them, the more they bought from us, the more word got out that we were carrying quality stuff. Traffic picked up. Of course, I had a background growing up in the jewelry business and retail, so that didn't hurt. And now, you know, even last year during the pandemic, I think we ended up having the best Christmas we've ever had. We've got people ordering online. We'll probably do $70,000 or $80,000 out of the gift shop. Now, keep in mind, we're 16 miles south of I-40. We're about 75 miles west or east of Oklahoma City and about 80 miles southwest of Tulsa. I mean, we're literally in the middle of nowhere. So if you want to come to Wewoka, you've got to be wanting to come to Wewoka because you're not going anywhere else. But anyway, so we've worked on the gift shop, but the building the museum is housed in was built by the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, in 1937. it was originally the Wewoka Community Center. I don't know if you've seen pictures of it, but it's a beautiful stone building. It's gorgeous, still has the original parquet wood floors. It's a fantastic place. It's not built to be a museum. It's a challenge to this day, but we've managed it and have done very well. But when I got there, the building was falling apart. The cedar wood was rotten. The windows were leaking. They were in bad shape. The roofs leaked, something terrible, which is horrible for a museum. There was no there's no quality storage for the artifacts. They just had them in cabinets, unlocked cabinets all over the building. So I spent the next several years, in addition to developing new programming, in fixing the building. And I'll give you a little plug that I give in Washington when I do advocacy work. We received a grant from IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, back in 2004, I think, about 4 years after I started. It was for $4,000, and it paid for an architect to come look at the building and a collections conservator to come look at our collections. And for that $4,000, they spent 2 days looking at our setup, and then they gave us reports on the condition of the building. They gave us reports on the condition of our collections and our storage and our exhibits, the whole 9 yards. And let me tell you, it was nothing but bad news. There wasn't anything in there that was good. And, you know, just in the architect's report, one of the things was, well, you need to fix your roof, and that's going to cost about $50,000. And that was just the roof. And that was a little intimidating, but I worked with the board. We came up with a plan. We started developing a strategic plan, which they'd never had a strategic plan before, didn't know what that was. Anyway, we set up some goals. I started making the rounds. I did the song and dance. If you needed a program at Lions Club, I'll be your program. If you've got a garden club and you got 25 ladies you want to entertain, I'll come do a program. I'll do my song and dance. And I did that for a long time. I started learning how to write grants. I didn't have a lot of grant writing experience. So I did everything I could to start raising money to fix this building. And through the end of last year, through the end of 2020, we're closing on in about $1.75 million that I've raised in non-federal funds. We have completely restored the building to a condition better than it was when it was built. We've new electricity, new lighting, new landscaping, new sidewalks, new exhibit spaces, everything, the whole nine, new air conditioning, new collection storage, the whole 9 yards. That's a very short walk through that period. You know, that took many, many, many years. But I like to think of things that are sometimes adverse as learning opportunities, and fixing that building and the exhibits has probably been the best thing I've done in the 20 years I've been here, for me, professionally.
It seems like when you said the World War II posters exhibit, that sort of reminded me about what you were saying earlier, is it got the community be organized again, like you said, during your upbringing. And have you had more experiences like that with different exhibits, more community engagement and stuff, or would that, you say, be the pinnacle of for the exhibits?
Oh no, that I think that sticks in my mind because that was the real start. Mm-hmm. That was when I knew that we could bring in programming or create programming and actually start connecting to people, you know, really making a difference. I had to guess one time, somebody asked me how many exhibits you've done. We do at least 3 exhibits a year. Sometime last year we had planned 5, which I don't know why we were that stupid, but anyway. So if we do 3 exhibits a year on average, I've been here 21 years. So, you know, you're looking at 63 exhibits. I will mention, and this was in the email, but I was going to mention it anyway, about, and time flies, I didn't look. It's been what, about 10 years since we did the Museums on Main Street exhibit, which was called Key Ingredients, America by Food, which was fantastic. I felt like we could have done a better job in doing it. I was pleased with the turnout, but you know, you're always critical of everything that you do. But it gave me an opportunity to bring in some new volunteers and some new components in the community. We had never worked with the local OSU Extension office,
Mhm.
but because this was food related, it gave us an opportunity to bring in all the OSU Extension people and talk about agriculture and food and home and community. Um, One of the reasons I wanted to host the exhibit is because food is such an important part of the Native community and Native culture and defining who they are as a people. So it gave us an opportunity to bring in some of the tribal elders to cook tribal foods like chatahaga, which is blue dumplings, and fry bread. Everybody loves fry bread,
Mhm.
and just and side meat and salt pork and all of that stuff. And we brought kids in from the high school to help cook some of these foods, the native kids, which is great. They absolutely loved it. We had people in for that exhibit in that town that had never set foot in that museum before. And I think that's critical. And that exhibit, it was so well done. And it came to us with so much materials, and so much support through the Humanities Council that it was, for something of its size and complexity, it was a breeze for a very small museum to pull off. I will also support or appreciate the support that Ann Thompson gave us, and of course was the director of Oklahoma Humanities at the time. She came to the opening exhibit and brought some of her staff, and we appreciate that greatly. Any small community loves the opportunity to show off for somebody in Tulsa or Oklahoma City. I mean, that's a big deal to us.
Yeah.
Big wigs town. Um, and that was also a time when I realized we could start pulling off some bigger stuff. We had done in-house exhibits. We had done a lot of smaller traveling exhibits. But once we pulled that off, even though I thought we could have done better, it was a good learning experience. I realized that we had the resources to do more. So we started seeking out more national traveling exhibitions. And now I'm big on that. I try and have at least one a year. Um, we did one called Return from Exile, which was contemporary Native American art, predominantly artists of the 5 tribes, but there were a few other Oklahoma tribes. It was a national traveling exhibition. Um, excuse me just a second. I never talked this long at one time.
I appreciate it.
Which is why I'm not a better storyteller. But anyway, that really is when we hit the jackpot. I got to know 2 of the artists that curated the exhibit and put it together, and now they're some of our best friends. But it allowed us to exhibit the work of about 26 or 27 Native artists. And again, because we're not a Native owned facility, we had not really reached out much into the Native community for art or support or programming or anything like that. Everything that was Native, we did predominantly in-house from our collections. But this was something new. This was an opportunity for us to get to know some really good emerging Native artists. And that's the best exhibit that I've had from a standpoint of moving us forward and what it did for us.
Um,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering, when was that exhibit?
Okay, this is
Don't mean to like.
well, time fly. I would say it's probably been 2017, 2016,
Gotcha.
2017.
Just very
And
curious.
we'd had a lot of exhibits in between then, and some of them had been traveling exhibits through Exhibits USA and things of that nature. But I am a huge fan of contemporary Native art. I see so many people that come in the museum that think that Native art is white buffaloes and men in war bonnets riding horses through the mesas, and that's not it, not anymore. That's not what Native art is. And there's there's a whole culture here, and there's a whole group of people, younger people, that have something to say. And the new native art, this contemporary native art is so expressive, so different, that we've embraced that. And we try at least once a year to have some sort of contemporary native art exhibit, whether it is a traveling exhibit or whether it's something we put together. I think it's important to speak to these issues. Return from Exile was the first time we had done any really out there contemporary art. And again, I live in a community that's kind of in a bubble in a way. They like to think they are. You know, Indian art is guys on horses running around, you know. So I wasn't sure how this was going to go, both inside the traditional Native community and then outside the Native community, because we serve the people of Wewoka as a museum well also. And we also serve the rural schools around Wewoka in about a 25-mile radius. So there's about 22,000 K through 8 students that are our primary target in that area. So we serve them too. So I was really unsure how they were going to go, you know, coming in and looking at some of this stuff, you know, might even have a, you know, a breast showing, you know, a little bit of nudity, oh, you know, and all these weird forms, you know, but it was an absolute hit. The opening reception for Return from Exile is the largest reception we've ever had. The artists came, a lot of them did. They brought their families. We got to meet those artists. We let them speak and do some programming and talk about their work. And the amount of people that were staying and listening to this intently, people that weren't native, just all different ages, everything. It was remarkable to me. And I would just pan the room and people were just enraptured listening to these artists talk about their work and what it had to say. And I thought, okay, that's when I knew we were on to something. And since then, it's just, that has blown everything open for us. We've gotten to know a lot of these artists. They've exhibited their work here. Last year, we did an exhibit called Savages and Princesses, and it was about breaking Native American stereotypes. Even though it was done in 2020 and we couldn't have people in, we did a Zoom panel with some of the artists to talk about Native stereotypes, put it up on our YouTube channel. It's got, you know, all kinds of views. I just think there's so much to say here about Native culture and their language and their belief systems. We did one contemporary art exhibit on Native Christianity. Well, you always hear about art, about traditional, about stomp dance and things of that nature. Seldom do you see an art exhibit on Native Christianity. That was a huge hit. We got the local churches involved because they're like, well, yeah, we know that the Indians go to church, but what do they do there? What's their view? What's their worldview? So, you know, and it was an opportunity to bring Christian natives and Christian traditionalists together too, to learn, you know, there's sometimes a little friction there depending on the individual, but this was an opportunity to open some dialogue. So that's been wonderful. I mean, I could talk about exhibits all day long.
Oh, yeah.
I will say that since we started doing these traveling exhibits and since we have started developing an interest in promoting art, we've become taken very seriously as an arts institution, an art, and a cultural institution too. We had somebody that was so impressed with what they're doing that about 7 years ago, they gave us $50,000 to start an endowment so that each year we can buy a new piece of art to add to our collection. So we have really increased the depth and the breadth of our art collection by this endowment. And of course, it's helped us build relationships with new artists because we're getting new artists into our collection. And they like it when you buy artwork from them. You know, it makes them very friendly. In fact, we have done so well in this that in October of last year, I got a call from an art dealer in Tulsa. He had a family that had a significant collection of art, and they were looking for a place to give it. They had planned on giving it to a museum, and I won't say which one, in Oklahoma City, but they weren't able to take the collection at that point. They were going to have to wait to take it. The family didn't want to wait, so they contacted us. And we went and we looked at it, we liked it, we received the collection a week after we started talking about it. And that was a collection of almost 600 works of art. It's huge. It's predominantly native art, 5 tribes art, lots of Seminole, lots of Muskogee Creek. So that brings our collection of art now up to about 1,200 pieces. So again, that's sizable for a museum of any size, but in a town of 3,000 people, that's remarkable. In fact, it's so big, we don't know where we're going to put it. We haven't figured that one out yet. So now I'm going to have to raise money to make a bigger building, which we need anyway. So that was a very I hope you're a good editor, because that was very rambling.
Oh, it's all, it's in the moment. It's, what do they call it? Like, just like letting the thoughts bleed out, which we appreciate. But it does seem the every time there is another experience or another level of engagement, whether it be through food or, like you said, through the internet, it does tend to blur the lines between these demographics and offers a more whole experience to the community. Although I did want to backtrack a bit, because you said that the Smithsonian, the museums on Main Street, was like the way you could have the traveling exhibits and stuff like that. Was that your first interaction with the Oklahoma Humanities? Was that like how that was all started? Because I know that there was a sorghum festival as well. Yeah. Correct?
You're testing my memory here, and it's not as good as it used to be. I will say that I know for a fact that was my first large-scale involvement with the humanities and what humanities could offer. To a certain extent, when I came here, because one, I didn't know much about the museum business. Some things were kind of on autopilot. So yes, every year for our sorghum festival, and that again, and I skipped it. I was going to go back to that. Because we have a sorghum festival and we make sorghum molasses, which for anybody that doesn't know is like molasses. It's a sweet syrup. Sorghum was used before refined sugar was available, and people would make sorghum, which is a dark colored syrup, again, like sugarcane molasses, as a sweetener. Well, in the early 70s, not long after we opened in 74, there was a gentleman that wanted to give a gift to the museum. Well, he had $100, which was a lot back in 74. Anyway, he wanted to get something nice for the museum. He decided he wanted to get a little buggy, a little horse-drawn buggy. So he went to the guy that had the buggy, and the guy wouldn't come down to $100 on it. So the guy was like, well, do you have anything else for $100? Well, I got that old sorghum mill over there. And he said, I'll take it. And here we are, almost 50 years later, drawing 20,000 people every year to watch us make sorghum with a bunch of mules. So anyway, sorghum is a big deal for us. To get 20,000 people every year, it's the largest event in all of Seminole and Hughes counties. It's the biggest thing going. And sorghum has been significant to us since we started making it back in 1976. And we have a big festival the 4th Saturday of October, Sorghum Day. Everybody knows about it. Anyway, sorghum syrup as a food as a food has been significant to Wewoka for many years, which is another reason that I wanted the key ingredients exhibit. I thought we had, excuse me, I thought we had something to say about sorghum. A lot of people don't know what sorghum is. They don't understand the health benefits of it. It's healthier than honey. Anyway, and there's actually, weirdly, there's been kind of a sorghum renaissance. We get people that come from all over to buy this stuff. There are, one of the chefs that used to work at the Park Avenue Grill at Skirvin Hilton used to make a glaze for his sea bass using our sorghum. And there's a group in Guthrie, Prairie Wolf Spirits. They use our sorghum to make rum. So it's good stuff. Anyway, the point being that sorghum's important to our history and our economy, and I thought it would tie in well with the key ingredients. It really, we never could have found an exhibit that actually tied in more to what we had to say than that exhibit. So I was very thankful for that. That did a lot for us.
Yeah, I mean, even the avenue of having food, I didn't even realize was a thing until you had mentioned. Because I've heard of some of the other Museum on Main Street ones, but this one seems like definitely the most sensory stimulating.
It was. They had a great exhibit that you put together. You know, it came in a bunch of cases, and it was simple enough that even I and one volunteer could put it together. But it was interactive. The kids could come in. They had a, you know, if you're a Green Bay fan, the cheese heads, the foam cheddar cheese heads, they had some of those you could play with. And I mean, that's a weird thing, but they had all kinds of really thought out, interactive, just things that would appeal to people of all ages and of all backgrounds. So the quality of the work I thought was tremendous. And I've highly recommended the Museums on Main Street program to other people. We did one, and I would be open to doing another one, but it just seems like our schedule's so packed now. I've never had, you know, room. And I know that they can do a lot for a community. So I like to see that they do go to other communities, that they're fantastic programs.
Yeah, it does seem like they really benefit, especially the rural communities. And speaking of which, I think I read there was a quote from you somewhere on the internet. I did my snooping for you before I did this interview, and it said you were talking about how rural communities or especially like, you know, they deem very important their own history and their own contributions to the histories that tend to get swept under the rug. And did that influence your advocacy on Washington and, you know, trying to bring voice to these underrepresented, populated communities?
Oh, absolutely. I've been doing advocacy in Washington. Well, I just finished my 7th year. We did that a couple of weeks ago. And part of what I do is I speak to the importance of IMLS, the NEA, and the NEH. And we have a contingent that goes to Washington, and I'm the small town guy. And I speak to what they can do for small towns. I've talked about the Museums on Main Street program. I've talked about some accessible grants through IMLS. Right now, I'm advocating to a grants to states program for IMLS, where they give money to the states to be subgranted to museums and organizations. The benefit being that the application process is more approachable at the state level than it is at the federal level. I don't know if you've ever applied for a federal grant, but if you don't have to, don't. It's not fun. But yes, I'm the voice of small towns in Washington. Well, for museums. I know Oklahoma Humanities goes up there. I know they advocate, and I fully support that. I've never talked much to Ann Thompson about the advocacy that they did, but I will tell you that it matters and it makes a difference. If you had told me 7 years ago that we could get some of our congressional constituents to sign on for funding letters for the arts and the humanities, or to make phone calls to, you know, the chairs of these committees, these appropriation committees, I would have said, nope, not going to happen. But it has started happening. We're making believers out of museum supporters in Congress. I mean, everybody, I mean, who hates museums, right? But getting them to always support what you want is often difficult. But we've made tremendous inroads with many different things, including humanities, Oklahoma Humanities, the support for the NEH. So I fully support advocacy. I know it takes time. It takes money to go up there and stand in these people's office and look them eye to eye, but it's worth it because they know it takes money. They know it takes your time to be there, and you wouldn't be there if you weren't serious. And I will say my board takes this serious enough that they fund me going. Museums Association does not fund me going. They recognize that we're making a difference, and they like the fact that their name gets mentioned in Washington, D.C.
It's a national big stage, I would
Yeah.
could only imagine. Speaking of, we're shifting gears here. You said advocacy takes time, and you have a money and all of that. What would you say the future for small town museum representation, for the humanities making their way from the bigger cities into these smaller little areas? What would be like the best case scenario, you think? And do you think that we're on our way towards it with what you're doing with the diffusal and having grants be approachable at the state level, so the federal level? And have you seen any benefits from that thus far?
Well, we're not at the point yet that they've agreed to do the grants to states program,
Gotcha.
but I think everybody needs to be approaching that. I think the NEA needs to be approached to do that. I think the NEH needs to be approached to do that if they want to continue to be relevant. And I think IMLS needs to do that. Now, let me say this. I don't know the statistics for the NEA and for the NEH. But before I went to Washington this year, I looked at the amount of federal money, IMLS money, that came to museums in Oklahoma. In the last 5 years, IMLS has given $2,001,000 to museums and cultural entities in Oklahoma. Every dollar of that went either to a tribal cultural institution or to a large museum. $250,000 to the Philbrook, $250,000 to the Gilcrease, money to the Cowboy Hall of Fame. None of that money went to small museums, and none of that money went to very rural communities. If we're going to be serious about the relevancy of the humanities, there's going to have to be a push to get the federal money more accessible. Small museums are not going to go through the federal grant application process. It is even getting to the point that you can apply for a grant are hurdles that small museums or volunteer organizations, they can't meet. It's too much. It's ridiculous. I mean, I've been writing grants for 30 years and it's a pain in my you-know-what. And, it's very prohibitive. The NEA announced the other day that they have some small grants for $10,000, just $10,000 flat. And the announcement said they're approachable, they're easy to get, they're easy to apply for. No, I checked that out. I looked at the information on the grant. And one of the things it says is if you're getting money, and I know we're getting a little off course, but it says if you're getting money and the money is going to be spent in or around a historic structure that's over 50 years old, well, we're going to have to specially review your grant and you're going to have to fill out a 9-page report telling us about your environment. Well, that's what group of 70-year-old volunteers at a small museum is going to do that? Why that's punishing these small organizations. Oklahoma has, at the moment, 508 museums and cultural institutions, which are almost exclusively, almost all of them, are small, rural, or volunteer organizations. We are leaving millions of dollars on the table, arts money, cultural money, humanities money, because these small organizations cannot access the funds. It's too difficult. But if we can get grants to states program through the NEH and make the NEH money more accessible, then we can bring more money into Oklahoma and we can help some of these small organizations. We can start doing more programs like museums on Main Street, or we can give these small organizations the tools to help themselves. But right now, I mean, I'm still looking at that NEA grant thinking, Do I want to go through all of this for $10,000? I mean, we're at the point now that I can make $10,000 with a phone call or two. So is it worth my time? It's certainly not worth the time of all these smaller organizations. I don't know, but there needs to be a conversation there. If NEH and Oklahoma Humanities wants to be relevant, we're going to have to find a way to make funding more accessible. I like Oklahoma Humanities grant system. I like the way their grants are laid out, and that's helpful. But that'll only go so far, and that reaches only so many people. They need more money. They could use more NEH money to fund more grants. So I think that there would be time well spent working on that. And again, I know advocacy works. So, you know, we need more people in the process.
Yeah, it seems as though trying to get like the pipeline from the big urban environments down to the rural areas seems to be the big recurring theme here too. And it seems like what you said, going back to the point about having contemporary native artists here as well, as if, do you think that there are benefits, and this is more of an abstract question towards the humanities itself, having the exhibits that do encapsulate modern native perspectives and sort of a reflection of life in modern era in these rural exhibits? Do you think if this were to happen across the country in these smaller areas, that you would have like, you know, positive reverberations in smaller areas that you usually see in the bigger urban areas in terms of like art and progressive movements? And if I'm not being more like clear enough, please like just tell me and I'll try and, you know, rephrase
Well,
this.
there's no telling what my answer is going to be anyway, or what direction I'm going to go.
That's true.
But no, I do. The things that I have seen with us having these exhibitions, and the great thing about these exhibitions is you can come in and you can look at the cool art and interpret it, and that's great if you're a, you know, if you're a right brain person and you're artsy. But you know, these conversations that we have with the artists, these panel discussions, that's the meat of the issue, and that's what I really like about these things, is there's so much to digest and break apart and converse about. I think, you know, I'd love to see an NEH Arts and Humanities partnership. I think, you know, you can't teach one really without the other, you know. But if there was a way that some of this stuff could be encapsulated, like an exhibition of native art with a very strong humanities component, and it and toured by Oklahoma Humanities or museums on Main Street. Sorry, I really don't ever talk this long. If this was a board meeting, they'd have shot me a long time ago.
I'm just glad to give you the platform, to be honest.
But it really, I mentioned earlier how I could stand in the gallery and look at all these different people, these disparate people, so engrossed in listening to an artist talk about where something came from deep inside them. You know, if we could, and we need this, we desperately as a country and as a people need this. We've got to get more people listening and thinking about other cultures and other perspectives and learning to show some respect for other people and other ideas. If there would be a way to encapsulate this and travel it, like, you know, again, like Key Ingredients, or the one they just did on, it was water, wasn't
Waterways,
it?
yeah.
Waterways, yeah. If they could do something like that, I think it would be tremendous.
I think a very meta thing too is to have a traveling exhibit about the importance of traveling exhibits and the diffusion of humanities and stuff. It seems as though through advocacy, you can, I'm not trying to say something that you're saying in a little more summarized version, but would you agree that you can get the people who have money, and if you can get them to listen, then you can funnel it down to the local level of the people who just need to be the engagement, to have that level of engagement that they may not have the opportunity to have if it's not for the people like in Washington, like in Oklahoma City, like in Tulsa, who have the funds in order to get that to the people. Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the things we do is when we go to Washington and we advocate, we go with facts. I mean, we just don't go, hey, museums are great and we need some money. You know, you can't do that. I had one of them, we were asking for a funding increase up to $80 million on something. And one of the congressmen said, no, really, how much do you want? Because you're not getting $80 million. So how much do you want? What's the real number you want? I'm like, I can't negotiate for the federal government. I'm sorry. But so you never know what you're going to get. You got to be prepared for anything. But yeah, we've started showing them that these things make a difference. And a lot of times you have to talk to them about numbers, about money, about economy, because unfortunately, sometimes saying we need this to help people understand one another and help build a better society, that's not going to get them reelected. But you have to talk in dollars and cents, but we've done that. We've opened that door, and they understand now that this is making a difference. They understand that having program and keeping a museum open in Wewoka, Oklahoma, brings people from Germany and Japan and China and all of that, and it makes for a stronger economy. And yes, they are believers now. There are ways you can have conversations with the money people, whether it be public money or whether it be private money. I get a lot of private grants, but it's kind of the same, not quite the same conversation, but a lot of the same conversation. And it's, if you approach it right, if you show them a pattern of success, then it's much easier to get what you need to help everybody. And I think Oklahoma Humanities has a great history of success. I think they can show they've made a significant difference. So at any level up here where the money exists, I think they can have a conversation. I think any organization can have that kind of a conversation, yeah, and get some results. I don't even know if I answered your question.
That's okay. I mean, I honestly just appreciate your, in the field, we're supposed to just, let you guide the conversation. I've been really engaged with where you've been taking it. It's really fascinating, actually, especially trying to quantify economically something like the humanities, which is very, person to person.
For years, I'd get press releases or I'd get something in the email and it would always talk about dollars and cents and dollars and cents. And I'd think that's not what's important. Mm-hmm. I want to know the human impact here. Mm-hmm. And I have also been chair of the Capital Preservation Commission here in Oklahoma. So I worked heavily with the Arts Council. And the Arts Council, I noticed, always talked in dollars and cents. And I thought, that is so crazy. But I understand now that it's the political world that demands it. Yeah. That's the language that the money people speak. So that's the language you speak to them. There's a humanities lesson about language. If you want something from someone, make the effort to speak their language, even if it's dollars and cents. So there's your humanities lesson.
Speaking of humanities lessons, and this is probably my final question, but it is, again, probably the most abstract and open-ended one you could answer. What do you think the importance of the humanities is? And you've answered about it. A lot of community engagement and advocacy seems to be very recurring things, but in a very broad sense, the humanities and their importance, and especially towards the future, do you think you could define those things, or is it just too broad?
Well, I will tell you sometimes what I say. This is not sexy. You're not going to use this in a quote. And I can elaborate. I mean, I can say other things too, but in my mind, I see humanities as what allows us to navigate the gray areas in life. Mm-hmm. Life is never black and white. And if there's a day that's black or white, it's usually a bad day. But everything exists in that gray area in between. And you've got to know how to deal with that. You've got to understand what shade of gray my decisions got to be here. You've got to be able to assimilate a lot of information to make informed choices. And a lot of decision making to me comes from experience. My travels, looking at other cultures, looking at history. My background comes from a history and a cultural perspective. So that's how I process a lot of things. I try when I make a decision to see every side and formulate the best decision I can. That's what the humanities mean to me. My brain works because of the humanities. Unfortunately, not everybody's does. Some people like things to be yes or no. This is what I like, that's what you like, and that's no good. You can't do that. But that, unfortunately, is the way our society's turning. I think our government can't work in the gray areas anymore. I don't think there's much compromise. I think it's, we've got more votes than you do, so you lose this time. Until next time, they have more votes. Our government works best and was designed to work on compromise. Whatever that is, that's the way it was supposed to work. And you can get on Facebook today or any kind of social media. There's a desperate need for the humanities. There is a desperate need for people to understand another person's perspective, whether it comes from their culture, their language, their life experiences, whatever it is. And it's the humanities that teaches us that. And I think we're losing that. I read somewhere a while back that bachelor's degrees in humanities are dropping considerably. Everything now is science and technology, it's STEM education. And I think that's all well and good. But it doesn't matter whether you're going to be a wealthy neurosurgeon or whether you're going to be a very wealthy plumber, and they're all getting wealthy now. You still have to interact with people. You still have to make decisions. You still have to vote. You still have to raise or be a part of a family or raise children. You've got to have reasoning experience, I guess, and that's gained through the humanities. You got to have perspective. You can't raise a decent kid without you having perspective and knowing that they need perspective. And our country desperately needs the humanities. Desperately.
Yeah. That was very eloquently put.
I don't know that, but thank you.
There's no wrong answer, and I very much enjoyed yours. Did you have anything you'd like to add towards the end? Because I think we're wrapping up, and if there's nothing else you'd like to add, thank you for.
I just appreciate that someone's doing this and that somebody's interested in what people think, and that they're recording this, whether it be for somebody 20 years from now to understand the state of the humanities or what people perceive the humanities to be. I think this is very important. I think the work that the Oklahoma Humanities does is terribly important, and I'm proud to talk about them when I go to Washington because they are on my mind. They're very much a part of who I am. And I mean, literally, this is what I do every day. I am the humanities. They may not want to lay claim to me, but I'm happy to lay claim to them.
Yeah, you're advocating on behalf of the humanities as a general, which is a very appreciated, position to have, I imagine. Well, I very much appreciate your position. And
thank you. I appreciate you doing this. And not be an easy job for you.
Oh, I love listening to people talk, and it's been a fascinating opportunity for me. But that's all I really need from you, and I do appreciate your time. And again, thank you so much for talking longer than you said you usually do. And I totally understand. It must be a lot on you, but I thank you. That's it. That's all I have.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you. I'd like to know more about the project and what's going to happen.
Yeah,
I'm very interested in it.
I can send you a follow-up email whenever this is all said and done. It's on behalf of, it'll be in Oklahoma State. OSU Stillwater has a oral history archive. And so this is basically historical evidence what we're doing right now.
Well, good. Maybe I can go up to my old stomping grounds sometime and take a look at everything they're doing with it up there and maybe look at a few. Of course, it'll probably be online, I'm sure.
Yeah.
See, old people like me, we think, oh, we got to drive somewhere to see something. But
comfort of your own home.
It'll give me an excuse to get up there anyway.
Yeah. And when was the Sorghum Festival? Is that happening this year?
Well, so far, yes, we are planning on it. It is always the 4th Saturday in October. And it's really something to see. It really is.
Sounds like something I'd like to be a part of. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to come down and visit. Maybe say hi if I can, get the
Well, I hope
chance.
you do. I hope you do. I'd love to meet you.
Yeah. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. And like I said
You too.
multiple times, very much appreciate this.
Well,
Take
I
it easy.
appreciate you too.